concern. So we thank you for being here. We are, again, going to take about 20 minutes or so and just sort of talk through this topic about smart manufacturing, getting a lot of coverage in the press nowadays. Many names used to talk about what we're going to talk about: Industry 4.0, smart manufacturing, digital transformation, the industrial internet. And so we're going to sort of poke at all of those things and really try to leverage our experience and backgrounds to help provide some clarity for folks. So with that, let me just formally introduce myself, and then I will ask Jim to introduce himself as well. So I am the Director of Manufacturing Services with Manufacturing Works. Resident of Northeast Ohio, been in the industrial automation, industrial software space for about 3.5 decades. Worked for big companies and small. I like to confess early on as I meet people that I'm a recovering solution provider. So a lot of the messaging and such that you see in the marketplace today, I've been a part of, either helping create some of that messaging in the past, or certainly trying to dissect and help people understand what the messaging means. So I guess with that, I'll turn it over and ask my partner here, Jim Wetzel. We switch through, and there we go. So Jim, you go ahead and introduce yourself here.
Got it. So good afternoon, everybody. Jim Wetzel. I am not a recovering solutions provider. I am steeped in industrial experience, being the practitioner, being the user side. So I had folks like Mike trying to sell to me and so on. So that's a whole nother story that in Q&A, if you want to learn about how to deal with vendors, I can share a bunch of tips and so on. I was my main job, my main part of my career was 32 years at General Mills. I was responsible for a topic called global reliability, which was really about improving the capability of all of the manufacturing assets, from maintenance and reliability to the control and information systems that are needed to run the operations, to core engineering technical competency, to energy and sustainability efforts to reduce the greenhouse impact from the resulting manufacturing. I was the interim CEO of SESME, the Smart Manufacturing Innovation Institute, sponsored under Manufacturing USA. I've been published on a number of different articles and stuff, but my main role is to try to figure out what help looks like for manufacturers, regardless of their size.
And Jim's very modest and very open and sharing person. He's done a lot for us, a lot for Manufacturing Works to make himself and his expertise accessible to us here. I should say for about the past 13 years, I've worked on the nonprofit side. So I've been a part of SESME, which Jim mentioned, and that we will talk about a little bit more. Also ran a nonprofit called Mesa International. And so this work, this common bond that Jim and I have, is trying to help manufacturers make sense of where solutions fit, what technology looks like, as far as being helpful, and how you navigate through just the realities of what the market looks like nowadays. So with that, we're going to just go ahead and jump in here. And what we wanted to do is just sort of frame up what we expect you're hearing or seeing when the term smart manufacturing comes up. And what we did to create this word cloud was basically just ask ChatGPT to go out and give us the top terms that you hear around smart manufacturing. And when you look at this cloud, what jumps out to me and Jim, I'll let you comment as well, is everything listed here is technology related, right? Talking about cyber systems, and talking about big data, and talking about smart and predictive analytics and all those sorts of things. And there's really nothing in here that is talking about the people side of things, the culture side of things, the leadership and operations, the shared business outcomes that the manufacturers are focused on. And so my main takeaway is, how in the world would you ever make sense of this, catch up from a knowledge perspective, and then keep up from a knowledge perspective? And one thing Jim did not say in his introduction was that he built the systems for General Mills back in the early 1990s, and then had to sustain those systems until his retirement a few years ago. So Jim's been steeped in the technology piece for a long, long time. So Jim, maybe just your thoughts on what it feels like to be a manufacturer and hear people using all of this techno.
Yeah. So great lead in, Mike, because you know what? This seems backwards, right?
Yeah.
It's the spirit of our webinar today, is that you kind of go, you look at this and say, where do you want to start in your journey of smart manufacturing? Let's Google it, right? Let's chat GPT it. What does this stuff mean? And when you Google it, what do you get? You get technology, you get buzzwords. Nowhere in here does it say that I've transformed my business. I've created new opportunities that I didn't have before. I've become a human-centric organization that's leveraged the few people that I have, right? So all we hear about in the media is about artificial intelligence and technology. All we hear in the media is talking about jobs that are threatened. All we hear in the media is that we can't, manufacturing jobs, we can't fill them. And so you kind of go, well, okay, there's grains of truth in all of that stuff, but why would you lead with that? Why wouldn't you lead with the value creation and the opportunities and the super exciting opportunities you have to dramatically change your business model and how you manufacture and how you get products and services into the hands of your consumers? But instead, we lead with technology stuff. And I think that's because if you start with Google as your source of reality, that space has been won by vendors. They have full-time people that are doing nothing but trying to market to you all. And so we're going to hopefully try to clear that up a little bit, as well as give you some hope for maybe a better way to go about this and approach how you too can get the value from these principles, but do it under your control versus under the being a victim of a vendor.
Yeah. So let's switch to our second slide. What we're gonna do here is just, we framed up. We couldn't put everything down that you're hearing about smart manufacturing and poke at it, but we picked 10 things that folks are likely hearing about smart manufacturing that we think are contrary, or we'd like to poke at over the next little bit. And so what we're going to do is just mention these briefly. We're going to go away from them and share a couple of things to address some of these points. And then we're going to come back. So if you could be thinking about these things, and if there's anything that jumps out at you as saying, hey, I believe that, or can you explain that more, that'll sort of frame up the conversations for us for the second half of this conversation. So we already started poking at number one, which is that regardless of what Google says or ChatGPT says, this is not about technology. We would also offer up a slightly provocative conversation that it's not a journey. That's a position that I believe strongly in. People use the terms Industry 4.0 and anything technology related to be the same thing as smart manufacturing. We're going to counter that and say that there's more to it, and we're going to talk about a framework to use to help put technology in its proper place. And you'll see that it's not just anybody doing anything with technology is automatically doing smart manufacturing. To Jim's point about the problems and the opportunities and the exciting things, we really think that there are exciting opportunities. We are seeing people do a lot of things, but this is really not about just getting new tools that have an IP address today when they used to have to plug into some sort of a plant level control system in order to get information out of them. That's not really what it's about. There are opportunities for us to be attacking problems and be capable of dealing with disruptions and problems that we don't even know we're going to face down the road. That's really sort of an underpinning of what smart manufacturing can be. It's more about that. And then I'm going to take number 5 and ask Jim just to cover the last 5. But some people will tell you that everything is brand new, and some people will tell you that we have been doing this forever. And the truth is somewhere in between. So we'll poke at that. So Jim, you want to talk about the second?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. So thank you. So smart manufacturing, in fact, is affordable. Smart manufacturing does not require sophisticated network infrastructure that's kind of connected with item number 9, does not require skilled information. Smart manufacturing is not only applicable to new or modern machines, it can actually go everywhere. Smart manufacturing does not require a long time for implementation and value realization. So I look at these 6 through 10 and go, it's a little gray. I mean, these are some provocative statements as well. And you kind of go, well, it could, or maybe it might. Cybersecurity, does not require sophisticated network technology. Well, it doesn't require it. But if you had one, it's not a bad thing. But a lot of people believe there's so much stuff to overcome that I'm overwhelmed to get started. And the point on 6 through 10 is get over that. Yeah. That's not where it really is.
And maybe, Jim, just for everybody, one thing that I'm looking and we talked about but didn't make the list. I think it's a sub bullet under this is the notion that the big manufacturers have it all figured out. So Jim, just before we jump into the rest of it, maybe talk about the fact that you come from a big organization. You had, I think over 100 facilities you manage. So talk about how someone from your position with a big organization can relate to smaller manufacturers when we make these kind of statements.
Yeah. So I'm currently consulting with the smallest of the small and the largest of the large right now. So I'm covering that whole range, and absolutely right, Mike. Nobody's got this figured out. And when you say, well, I'm already behind, or I got to do catch up, or all that kind of stuff, that's not true either. Everyone is at the beginning of this. And when I look at the largest of the large companies, they invested in network technology. They invested in data servers and a lot of heavy applications. They invested in getting their control and automation systems on the network back in the early 90s when that technology was just emerging. And so they did what I would call a lot of legacy upgrade kinds of investments, spent hundreds of millions of dollars of getting their infrastructure upgraded. To some extent, bring it back, 20 or 30 years later, a lot of that stuff can be skipped over. So it's much the same as like in India, they skipped over landlines and went directly to cell phones. So they didn't have to lay down all the wiring, do all this stuff the large companies are doing. That, as an example, in an analogy, there's this opportunity to skip over a bunch of this stuff, and so so it ends up getting them about the same place. Now they're a little bit more sophisticated in having gone through that journey. Some of those pain points around how data is consumed, how data is contextualized, what am I going to do with it? What's the change management process of people? They've experienced all of those issues, all those failure modes. And so there's a huge opportunity to learn from folks that have been at this for 30 years and get those pain points in front of you. And that's actually another area that we're going to talk to you about, to be able to present lessons learned and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. So I that's spot on in my opinion. So if there's a takeaway to go, okay, why should I be excited about this? That point that we're not as far behind as we probably think we are is a really valid point. And not to toot the horn of the technologists as we're sort of staking a claim that sways this conversation too much, but really it is because there are new technologies that are available today that were not available in the past, that does allow a manufacturer to start today without that legacy infrastructure that Jim was referring to. So if you could just think about these while we're talking. If anything pops up in your head, go ahead and put it in the chat. If not, just make note of it, and we'll come back to this slide as our at the end here to talk through these points. But at first, we wanted to just step back and sort of do a little bit of positioning, talk about defining smart manufacturing and poking at a few things. And so we'll just take 2 or 3 slides here, talk about that, and then we'll come back to that slide with the different points we were talking about. So first, I want to offer up here a new definition. It says smart manufacturing delivers information that enables the optimization of production activities from order launch to finished goods. It uses current and accurate data to guide, initiate, respond to, and report on plant activities as they occur. The resulting rapid response to changing conditions, coupled with a focus on reducing non-value-add activities, drives efficient plant operations and processes. Smart manufacturing improves the return on operational assets, as well as on-time delivery, inventory turns, gross margin, and cash flow performance. And it provides mission-critical information about production activities across your enterprise and the supply chain via bidirectional communications. So to me, that's a pretty good definition. I would probably poke at it, and to our earlier point, and say it doesn't mention enough about the people role and things like that. But the bigger problem that I have with this definition is that it is actually not a new definition. This is the definition of MES from a nonprofit called Mesa International that was written in 1997. So this sort of touches on the point we're talking about, that this is not all brand new. What we are looking to do, what we are working to accomplish as an ecosystem, a lot of these points are very much spot on, but how we're able to go about them is quite a bit different today than they were in the past. One of the things that Jim and I talk about quite a bit is that I don't believe a definition does us a whole lot of good. And I equate it to defining recycling, because depending on where each of us lives, recycling means something different to us. So my parents live in Pennsylvania. They can recycle any plastics. In my community, we can't recycle plastics at all unless it's a bottle with a neck on it. We can recycle all paper, all cardboard. My parents can't recycle any of that stuff. So having a definition in and of itself doesn't do anything unless you can take that program, that definition, and see what it means for you. What does it mean for, in that case, your household? In the case of smart manufacturing, what does it mean for your business? And so to me, it's more a matter of us framing smart manufacturing as opposed to defining it. And with that, I want to throw it over to Jim, unless you had any comments, Jim, on this definition.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. So this is a set of tools that Jim and his work through Sesame is creating and allowing manufacturers to frame what smart manufacturing means to them in their business, which I think is much more effective, much more actionable, much more real than just going off some static definition. So Jim, you want to talk to everybody about this framework?
Yeah, so I'm going to bounce around a little bit. So Mike, if you could just go to the next slide.
Sure.
I'm going to start there, and then after this, I'll go backwards.
Yep.
So well, we're trying to take a look at things differently and say, how do you start? when I was the CEO of the Smart Manufacturing Innovation Institute, here you had company members that certainly supported the concept and the definition that Mike talked about, but to a customer, to a client, to a manufacturer, they still struggled with, how do I get started? And kind of the traditional way that folks have gotten started, in this concept of frame versus define, is someone somewhere, whether it's the president or head of manufacturing, or it's an engineer, or it's an operations person or a plant manager, can come from kind of anywhere in the organization. They get enamored by some technology that they saw at a show, or they heard about, or a friend is doing something, and they go, yeah, that would solve a bunch of problems for me. And then they go and purchase that technology because it might actually be awesome. And then it goes nowhere. The champion moves on, this thing ends up dying, or it doesn't integrate with different things. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when you look at why did that succeed, or more likely, why did that fail, what you find out is there never was a plan. There never was a plan for success. There was a project that I now call whack-a-mole. A problem came up, someone identified it, or someone identified sometimes it's the hammer looking for the nail, or the sledgehammer looking for the mole. I'd really love to deploy this technology. I wonder what problem sets it could solve. Whether you go one way or the other, both manners set themselves up for failure, because it hasn't been contextualized inside of an operational plan that's going to go after business objectives for your company. And so we developed this process with SESME, Smart Manufacturing Institute, that says, no, well, the first thing you need to do, it's ready, fire, or ready, aim, fire. You don't start off with fire. Go ahead and plan. And then people get paralyzed because they say, oh, I don't want to go through a PowerPoint planning session because that's going to take months. I just want to get started. And so we developed a process that is lean, that is quick, roughly around 40 hours worth of work. And away you go. You can have a roadmap. And we're going to talk briefly about that. And the big thing is that when you're trying to figure out how I get started and what context do I use, you don't lead with technology. And so we came up with these 6 areas, these 6 critical areas for manufacturing. What's your strategy and leadership? What does your culture look like relative to continuous improvement and manufacturing excellence? How do you use data to drive decision-making in your factory and in your operations? What kinds of systems do you have? What's their capability? How are they integrated, and how are they interoperable? What are you doing with people? What's the role of people in your manufacturing environment? And then how are you interfacing across your supply network, both the upstream and downstream, so the complete supply chain, and what's your role in it? So now if we can go back up a slide.
Just before we leave this and you go to that, I just wanted to comment that this is an entire ecosystem discussion as well. So you see, this is a perpetual process, that this is something that you go through this process. And what our objective is, what we're working to do through Manufacturing Works and drive nationally, is to teach manufacturers and to teach the ecosystem, make sure that there are people around that talk this same language and can support you. So when you see this circle going around, that's where someone like a Manufacturing Works comes in, somebody that you trust to get your advice from, and to bring forward people that are trustworthy. That is an integral part to this process overall. So I'll go back up for you, Jim.
Yep. And so as you think about, if you remember that chevron that we just showed, from assess to roadmap to projects and execution, you go, well, how do I start? We created this tool that allows organizations to understand where they currently are, understand then their future state, and then understand how to go from where you are to where you want to be. And that we call that the roadmap. And ultimately, at the end of the day, these 6 critical areas are being evaluated, or essentially you're looking in the mirror. Where am I on my strategy and leadership? What is my excellence in culture? What am I doing with data-driven processes? Tell me about my systems, my workforce, my supply chain agility. And in this example, this is just displaying one half of this equation right now. This is just the current state. And the other dots that are around it are so the orange line going through is the average for this entire organization. And the dots are different functions within the organization. So a lot of times sources for failure in trying to move the organization forward is you don't have alignment. Everyone's not rowing the boat together. They might not even know why are they even in the same boat. And so when you look in the mirror and you assess and you get involvement from all facets of your organization, and you're talking about where you are, and then you're having the secondary conversation of, but where do you want to be? Then it gets really rich, and you can start picking away and you say, well, I thought my opportunity was this. Someone else says, yeah, but I can get 2x opportunity if I did that. And this becomes the richness of discussion versus someone going to a trade show, walking down an aisle and saying, wow, that technology is really cool. I think I could apply that. And so this is just one slice of this little tool stuff. So you're just getting a glimpse of it. But the power is understand where you are, understand the variability within your organization so you can get alignment. But more provocatively, understand how you're going to go from where you are to where you want to be and what must be true. So in the process, it's all about determining what capabilities and what elements must be there for you to have a successful transformation.
Yeah, and Jim, if I could just comment on a couple of things here with regard to the tools themselves and how I've seen people interact with them. A couple of things jump out to me. Number one, many organizations assign whatever you call it, whatever the initiative is, we'll call it smart manufacturing here, assign smart manufacturing to one person in the organization and say, you got it, you go figure it out. You tell us what it means. Where do we go? What do we do? I did a workshop in Greenville, South Carolina, about a year and a half ago. And one guy got up afterwards. He came up to me and he said, that's me. He's like, the organization's not doing anything other than expecting me to go figure this out. Right. And he said, after looking at this and seeing how pervasive this is and how it impacts so many parts of who we are as an organization, I'm going back to the organization and telling them that this is not just something for me to go figure out, but we have to understand, to Jim's point, where do our people play? What is our philosophy on our people? Are we trying to empower them to solve problems day to day, or are we trying to automate them out? Right? That's a completely different mindset of how you approach things. The second thing I would say with regard to this is, so far in my experience, I haven't seen anybody that has said we absolutely have to be all the way out to the right, that everything that we're doing when we look at a future state is that we have to be a lights out adaptive organization. And being able to just move from where you are and use a tool like this to get the organization to have a common understanding of what this stuff means is really powerful and gives us a good way to have the discussions about what is important to the organization.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add, Mike, is smart manufacturing is a mindset and a value proposition that needs to be in your DNA. So, your comment about so-and-so was made in charge of smart manufacturing in an organization, or so-and-so was made in charge of digital transformation. We've learned over the last 30 and 40 years, if you're really going to go after something, you need to make it part of your DNA of your organization, not assign it to a person. So how many organizations today have quality assigned to one person or a function, right? The measurement of it for sure is in a function,
Right.
but quality, think back in the 90s, what was Ford Motors Company's slogan? Quality is job one, right? And so it's not a department, it's what we all do. Safety, take a look at safety. Is there only one person that's in charge of safety in manufacturing? No, all employees are accountable to be safe and wear their personal protection equipment and have safe behaviors and all that kind of stuff. So why would smart manufacturing be assigned to the engineering department or the IT department? This is where it gets totally wrong. You go and assign smart manufacturing, you assign it to the IT department, who doesn't even know anything about manufacturing. So they know about software solutions. So if you want to actually stand up and deploy a software solution, fine. They're a service that can be hired. You certainly don't want them leading it because they're not the user, they're not the practitioner. And so, yeah. And so there's a question here. How does a company know when transformation or adoption of new practices are in order? And the comment on that is really, when you're going through this assessment process and you start with this current state, like what's shown on the screen, when you dig into the actual questions that are behind this, you'll find out where there's misalignment and when there's opportunity. To determine about this, so that's about what opportunities are available to you to peel back the onion and see the fit. The second part of the question is our in order. So the in order part is around business value and what you're going to get out of it. So like Mike said, not everybody's going to have the same recipe. Just because it's possible doesn't mean you should do it. And not everyone's going to move to the far right because it doesn't add any value for the what the goals and objectives of that particular business are. And so we've built out another tool and process, so we call it the napkin calculator, that allows you to figure out the business value very quickly at a high level so you can understand, is there money in the hills? Is it in order to do this? Now, in that discussion and in that analysis, there's two aspects to that in order. One is the raw blocking and tackling of the value creation. The second side of it is the strategic component of what it might enable. So maybe the money's not there from a tactical standpoint, but the strategic influence is there, and that's in line with the leadership strategy to be someplace else, right? So wherever you've planted your true north flag, if this transformation is in order to get there, then you've answered your question. Okay. If it's value creation in order to get there through tactical deployments, then you've answered your question. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, so we want to start to open up. I just do want to back up for 1 second to the definition, because I do think I love poking at this definition because of its age, but also when we frame up what smart manufacturing is about, this is poking at the right things, right? So optimizing your activities from when you're ready to make a product until you've completed the product, having information to make informed decisions in real time, to eliminate non-value add activities, drive your plant profitability, efficiency, safety, quality, all of those aspects, get a return on your business and be more profitable in how you do things and be a better supply chain partner. So when we frame up like what is smart manufacturing, all of these elements are there, right? And it is about having the information you need to make informed decision real time as you need them to be. And so this is the area of where there are a lot of elements of this that are spot on as far as what we're looking to accomplish. Then it gets to be a question of, well, how do we go about doing it? And that's where we get into more of the framing and saying, it's an organizational conversation and how do we prioritize what we want to do as an organization? And that's why I sort of like to poke at saying that it's not really a journey, And we'll come back to this and I guess open up the floor for more questions and encourage you to go ahead and turn the cameras on if you like. And again, to reiterate, if you wanted to ask something anonymously, just DM Ann directly and she can ask the questions. But when we talk about something being a journey, we talk about like Jim's in Minneapolis. And if I wanted to drive from here to Minneapolis, I would definitely need a map, right? It'd be silly of me to set out without having a map. But that implies that I'm going to get somewhere, I'm going to be done. And I think if you look at what Jim is talking about with how quality is ingrained in an organization and how safety is ingrained in an organization, this is really more about how you're going to build digital capabilities within your organization that empower you to solve any problems that you have today and how you're responsive to opportunities, disruption, things like that down the road. So that's why I don't like to tell people that this is a journey, even though it is framing up. I think typically people are looking at saying that you're not going to be done with this overnight, and that is certainly true.
Yeah. So let me just add just a couple comments on that, Mike. Is safety a journey? Everyone has the goal of 0. Are you ever going to get to 0? The answer probably is no. You probably have a near miss, or you probably have an incident or something like that, but you're going to get potentially pretty close to 0. Does that mean you failed? No. It's a mindset, it's an approach that you're taking. And so when I take a look at this and go, here's the part that I think everyone needs to figure out how they can transform, starting with themselves. How can smart manufacturing become a mindset? Because that's when you're going to finally see the opportunities pop up. And my example kind of goes like this. When safety is a thing to do or follow, you don't see all the opportunities to become safer. And an example I'll give is at General Mills, we went from good to great in safety. And one of the examples is in the old days when we were good, we didn't have requirements. I'll give a real simple one. We didn't have any kind of thought or requirements about how you would go downstairs. Yet our number one issue was trip, slips, and falls. And so when we said, this needs to be part of our DNA, what would we do? We'd say, you need to hold on to the handrail when you walk down your steps. You need to make sure that you don't have things in your hands that would stop you from catching your fall. And when you're sitting here in Minnesota and you're walking from your car in the middle of winter and you slip on some ice, because that's our working conditions, that's our environment we live, do you just report that you slipped? No. You give people sand in Nalgene bottles and they fix the ice along the way so the person behind them doesn't slip. So once you kind of get over the hump on this topic, like safety, you see all these opportunities to get better. I'm suggesting that you need to get over the hump on smart manufacturing, not look at it like a digital project, but look at it as a mindset. And here's an example of what you'll see. I've already crossed that chasm. And if I was to come in your facility, I'd sit here and go, tell me about the journey of that piece of paper that the operator's writing down data on. Where does it go? Oh, it goes to the quality lab. They review it at the end of the day. Then it goes into a banker's box because we have to save it for record keeping. And then 7 years from now, we throw it out. Well, from a smart manufacturing standpoint, you'd go, so one, why are we recording that at all? Challenge that. Second would be, if it's something important to record, is there knowledge? Can I learn anything about that data? So today I can capture it really cheaply. Today I can put artificial intelligence scripts again, and I can actually get learnings from the data that today is going to the garbage. So that's a mindset of looking at things differently. And we have a lot of workshops and things like that to go, how do we get someone to think differently instead of thinking about technology as islands?
I can vouch for what Jim's saying because he and I did a smart manufacturing workshop for the U.S. Army back in May. And when we got into the facility in the morning, I backed into our parking spot and he said, "Oh, safety parking." I said, "What do you mean by that?" My wife makes fun of me that I'm a fancy parker when I back in. And he said, "No, at General Mills, we encourage people to back into the parking spots so that they can leave efficiently at the end of the day, probably when they're more tired, or if there's an emergency, you can exit more safely pulling out forward than backing out." So again, to that point, that it's just ingrained in who they are. And that's really where I think smart manufacturing needs to meld in with what your business is working to accomplish and support what it is that you're trying to do, as opposed to being something that you want to go and do and be a part of. So I just, again, want to open the floor up. If anybody has questions, you can unmic, you can take your camera off, you can poke at any of these ideas that we've put up here. If you want to challenge any of them, or if you have questions of your own that are not on here, ask you to please step forward and raise your hand. I see one question from Anne. It says in number 7 that one does not need sophisticated network infrastructure. What kind of investment is needed for some of our older machines? Jim, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So,
I will say too, I expected that to be the first place where people were going to ask questions.
so collecting data from older machines used to be a Achilles heel. That was just a problem of the day. That's now, the good news is that's basically been solved. And there's a handful of companies out there that have business models that you can buy $1,000 gateway device to just plug in and connect directly to your machinery and expose all of that information from legacy equipment to your infrastructure. There's another organization that has a subscription model, and they charge $50 a month to be able to have their hardware connect to your system. So it's not a huge investment to connect to these older machines. The issue on some of these older machines is, will the vendor of the older machine not just allow you to connect, but allow you to tell you what the data is? So some of these vendors have said, no, I'm not going to, I'll allow you to connect, but I won't tell you what's behind pin number 1 and pin number 2 and pin number 3. Or I'll sell you our solution to do that. You don't want to get into that game.
So Jim,
Go ahead.
Another way too, though, just obviously there are devices nowadays that you can clamp onto incoming power, and it can infer states of machines and
Right.
things like that. You can use sensor technologies, but there are also folks that are doing things to put being able to do this and get the type of information off the floor that you need doesn't necessarily mean that you need to hardwire sensors into every machine, right? Because there are people that are just setting up some sensors at the beginning of a line and at the end of a line and getting some triggers so they can count parts and flows and things like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on how sophisticated you want to go, and depends what problems you're trying to solve, right? So at a very simple level, if you want to understand uptime, downtime, production count, yield, and efficiencies kinds of things, there are numerous examples where they're putting no sensors at all on equipment. They're not connecting to the equipment at all. What they're doing is they're putting in $200 video cameras, and they're giving the plant floor good looking. And they go, I know when the line's down because the guard door's open because an operator's crawling in there to unjam something. I know what product they're running because I can take my video camera and look at the clipboard and actually read it. So I don't even have to worry about digitize. I digitize it through video. And so for $200 and sending the video streams, there's now sophisticated technology in the cloud that can decode all this stuff and then spit up to you visual dashboards around your line performance and your production and your downtime, and requires no you don't need to go into, you don't need to pull the cabinet open of the old equipment and plug in at all. So it can be nothing around connection. It can be put in a gateway and plug in. That stuff's developed, and it could be as extensive of add additional sensors in. So it kind of depends, but it's not the cost of this is in the hundreds of dollars or low $1,000. It's not millions of dollars.
And I think that point of how deep you go, how sophisticated you get, goes back to the first question that was asked as far as how do folks know? And it comes down to having a roadmap, right? Understanding where you're trying to go, what you're trying to accomplish as a business, and then going out and getting the information that you need accordingly.
Yeah, and it's really typical, just like safety or just like quality. A very simple starting point is to just make visible how things are going, right? I don't know how to go on a quality journey if I don't understand how many defects I have. I don't know how to go on a smart manufacturing optimization journey if I don't know what my production count is or what it should have been, right? So people start off with dashboarding, automating some form of their production log or their productivity thing, because typically most organizations have some form of daily goal setting, daily gathering kind of meeting where they huddle for 15 minutes and before the shift, and they talk about what happened and what are they going to do and so on and so on. And that can all be augmented through digital capabilities very cheaply.
Yeah. I guess one of the things that we are considering is how do we do these types of forums regularly and have these types of conversations. And so this type of interactivity is possible for us, but obviously we would need some interactions. So are there any other items that are listed here that draw anybody's attention, or you want to understand more and unpack, or does anybody have a completely different conversation that you want to start? I see someone coming off camera here. Is that Chelsea?
It's Chelsea. Happy to jump in. And I'm a firm believer in everything you said. I feel like a lot of the message almost resonates with business 101, have a plan and then reinforce it. I think the hardest struggle and outside of manufacturing is those of us trying to plug into manufacturing that maybe don't have the expertise that you do. So when it comes to something like, I'll take advanced air mobility and trying to talk to automobile manufacturers about how to almost change, not change the process as much as change the mindset in terms of adoption of new technologies that almost challenge what they're doing. How would you apply some of these principles in those almost cross-sector support streams, I should say?
Well, there's got to be something in it for you, right? So, but human nature kind of avoids change unless there's something in it for you. And it was kind of funny at General Mills, our engineering and our IT people were the biggest whiners about getting a new version of Office to their desktop, because they had to relearn how the menu bar was and where they would click on things. And I go, well, you're expecting manufacturing to adopt all these new technology, but when you get something, you scream bloody murder. Because ultimately, change is hard, and it forces you to learn something new. And you go, I think I'm moving backwards because I'm spending all this time. I just got good on something, and now it changed, and I'm asking me doing something else. And that change is accepted barely when there's some value in it for you. So a lot of times the question that's never answered the bigger question that's never answered by persona, what's in it for me? What's in it for me, the plant manager? What's in it for me, the supplier? What's in it for me, the whatever, both, in your company, outside your company. And if you can't answer that, you're just going to get resistance. And so we don't do a very good job at that. And part of that is because we don't even understand what the need is of those different audiences.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing to me how many of the conversations we have, and I just facilitated a conversation yesterday on continuous improvement through the lens of smart manufacturing, and most of the conversation that they kept spinning around and coming back to leadership right? And being committed to where you're going, and giving your people the room to, in that case, experiment and things like that. So it's very much a leadership conversation and working through these things, because the technologies, to Jim's point about the cameras and the sensors and things, the technologies are plenty capable, and we can get them in line with where you need your business to go. But you need to know where your business is going and how these things align, and that takes, buy-in from a lot of different people in the organization.
But well, and to add on to that, Mike, kind of sad to say, if you cracked open the history books and looked at a lot of the efforts that were published under Edward Deming 50 plus years ago, he would say the fundamental problem is leadership.
Yeah.
And all the sins come from leadership. And those of us that are trying to run operations or trying to run equipment are running systems that are not capable of meeting the requirements that leadership has set forth. And then blaming the people for not achieving the goals, but they never had systems and capability that ever met the goals.
Right. Okay. Now, I don't want to take us off of these conversations, but in case anybody ends up stepping out early, I did just want to make one note of an upcoming event that we have. So I just want to talk about this, and then we can keep the conversation going for the rest of the hour here. On October 4th, Jim will be flying to town. He and I will be running a half-day workshop on the Sesame tools that he referenced earlier. And so you can contact me if you're interested in being a part of this. Sesame is the National Institute on Smart Manufacturing. They actually have funds for us and are working with Manufacturing Works to help create roadmaps for manufacturers. So if you are interested in having this work done and potentially subsidized, we will be doing it at this event, and I can help you either get registered for this event, or we certainly can talk not having to wait for the event. We're actually having a conversation tomorrow with one organization, a member of Manufacturing Works, where we're talking to them about kicking off a roadmap project. So I just want to make sure that we got that out and didn't lose people before this was put forward. But so are there others that have questions? Or Chelsea, did you have anything else that you wanted to chime in on? Or
No, and this was great. So thank you so much.
I see Marcia is.
Yeah. Hi, Mike. Hi, Jim. This has been super informative. In my role, so I'm the director of program engagement at Manufacturing Works. I speak with owners all the time, all day long. And I know that it's really difficult for them to discern what's important for them to look at to improve their company, especially, an older generation. We talk about now how the current owners and leadership teams are aging out. How do we have that conversation with these manufacturers where they realize that change is good? And how do we encourage the ROI, and how do we start that conversation is really my question.
Yeah. And what we've done is we work the process of saying, you are here, right? So look in the mirror and truly state what your current state is, and then work with them to establish that future state. Forget for a second how you get there. Just see where that future state is. And it might be, and working with some of these smaller owners, you would think that they don't want to move much. Current and future are pretty close together. Once you start peeling back the onion, they didn't know some of these things were possible. They didn't know the size of the prize. They go, oh, either my company is going to continue to get smaller, or if I take on these things and they actually are possible, I could be this. And going through that exercise, it has been frame breaking for an eye-opening for folks that are kind of stuck.
And I think too, to go with that, Marcia, and I see that Najee has come on camera as well. Our role at Manufacturing Works and throughout this region is to drive awareness, to help with education, to provide safe forums for manufacturers to meet and collaborate and talk and learn. What I push back against all the time is anybody who says that you're on the journey once you start an implementation, I think that you're doing a disservice to the amount of work we need to do up front on driving awareness and getting people educated and people thinking about what's possible. So I would say anybody that's at an event like this and is starting to open your mind and look at these things is on their way, right? This is part of the journey, and more of the work that we have to do, not only as manufacturing works, but as the smart manufacturing cluster and the universities and the community colleges and all the nonprofits and others that are working to the same ends. So I know we're almost out of time, and Najee, I see you have your camera on. You want to go ahead and ask your question or comments?
Yes, thanks for the invite. From the leadership perspective, right, those that, I'm not in the manufacturing space, right, tech background in real estate, but looking to dive deeper into the smart building space in particular and adding value there from a commercial real estate standpoint. But for those that are kind of, they understand the tech piece, they see kind of things with the new emerging markets or industries. What's your thoughts from a manufacturing perspective, those that kind of get it, I guess, whether they have technology or they're willing to implement technology? What are your thoughts from a kind of 30,000-foot view industry standpoint, maybe regionally around Cleveland, that we've been known for from a manufacturing standpoint, but the future of like advanced manufacturing, smart manufacturing, where do you think there are some avenues that we're either missing out from an opportunity standpoint, or we could be the first to really maximize the opportunity that is in front of us now?
I'll start the conversation, then Mike, why don't you finish that?
Sure.
So through the Team Neo and the broader Northeast Ohio effort, you know, they wrote the white paper on the size of the prize for Northeast Ohio, and it's massive. And I'll leave that for Mike to kind of frame up as to what that opportunity is. Huge. The issue has been getting adoption and getting people to start. And so you think about we need to have a frame breaking approach. And Mike and I have been talking about this with Manufacturing Works and others. If there's 7,000 manufacturers in the broader Cleveland area, we have programs and projects to address 20 a year, 50 a year, 100 a year. We're never going to get there. So a huge opportunity is to figure out, how do you think differently to address the broader Cleveland area and the scale that it presents. So here's what can be unique about the broader Cleveland area. They could figure out, and this is what Mike and I have been working on, how to figure out how to lift all boats, or as many as possible. Not 10 a year, thousands a year. Because if you're going to try to make a transformation, you can't do it one at a time. That's the old school way. The old school way was heavy lifting one at a time. That's not going to get us there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work nowadays. Like, the technology is actually quite enabling, right? You're now moving to things like low code and no code, right? And you have cloud infrastructure and you have analytics, you have the opportunity to build apps quickly. And there is an opportunity for people to innovate around this space that weren't there, or, struggled with the technologies of the past. So I think, in addition to what Jim said, because to his point, Team Neo did a report a few years ago, a smart manufacturing roadmap, and said that by 2025, we could have an economic uplift in this region of $6 billion annually if we could get just, I think it was a quarter of the manufacturers to drive basically the process improvements, the stuff that we talked about in the definition here of smart manufacturing. And that's just in sort of the performance and operations of the manufacturing base. But I think in addition to that, the ecosystem around manufacturing has an opportunity to grow and support manufacturing and help them innovate and help a lot of these smaller companies with resources that really just are not available or accessible today.
Yeah, it's really tackling this topic of at scale and trying to break the old model of every manufacturer is different. Therefore, every solution has to be unique and every engagement has to be one-on-one. If you stick to that mindset, you can't do very many things. You can't lift all boats.
And in line with that, one of the things that I'm very bullish on, and I know we are over the time limit, I apologize. I put our the last slide up, so you have my email address, you have Jim's email address, you have our cell phone numbers. You can find us on LinkedIn. We are absolutely willing to continue this. And when you get feedback from Manufacturing Works, if you're interested in this kind of forum, we can continue with this. But I definitely believe there's a role for community, that there is these 7,700 manufacturers that we have in Northeast Ohio have a compelling reason to work together to help drive the economic impact in this region. We have better schools, we have better educated workers, we have more prosperity, right? So there's a reason why we can work together, but there's a lot of reasons why we don't. We don't share openly. We don't necessarily have forums, places where we trust we can share. And I do think we have an opportunity to knock down some barriers, come together and do things. Because the reality is, and I hate this term, I don't have a better one for it, but the cavalry is not coming, right? There's not going to be a technology solution or solution provider that shows up on your door and solves all your problems for you. And so we're going to have to take ownership of that individually and collectively. And I think we have the opportunity to do that through community. And I'd love to see what's happening in our community. We have great resources, universities, community colleges, nonprofits, big business, small business. So there's a lot of good stuff that's happening. We just have an opportunity, I think, to drive conversation and drive activities from this. And the reason that we centered on the framework that we did is because it is a way for us to get actionable with people right here, right now. So I think with that, out of respect for everybody's time, we'll go ahead and we will close this. Again, our emails and cell phone numbers are there. Happy to keep the conversation going at any time. So please reach out. And we are recording this. We have recorded it. It will be posted on our YouTube channel. And if you're not following the Manufacturing Works newsletter, I encourage you to sign up for that. We'll continue to promote these events and others as we have more of these types of events. So with that, I want to thank Jim for being here. So appreciate your help as always. And we'll go ahead and sign